Okay, so last night was the meetup game at Hollywood Park, hosted by Andrew Neeme and Brad Owen. And man, it was a really good time. It was my first time getting a chance to play against Andrew Neeme, and unfortunately didn't get a chance to play against Brad, but we still spoke, and like I said, it was an overall really fun time. So super quick, wanted to give a shout out to Corey, one of the floor staff there. He said he watched my previous episode from Hollywood Park and shared it with his coworkers, and they're all working to improve on some of the things I touched on when discussing their poker room. So I thought that was awesome and really humbling that a casino would even consider what I'm saying to envision some further improvements. Shout out to you, Corey. Let's get into some poker hands. The game was 5-5, no limit, with a $300 to $500 buy-in. We sit down at our table. It's one of the first tables to open for the meetup game. And right off the bat, we look down at pocket aces. There's an early position open to $20, 2 callers, gets to us in the small blind. I'm gonna put in a raise here. I make it 110 to go. The early position opener makes the call, and the other 2 players get out of the way. So we're going heads up to a flop here, which comes queen 8-6 with 2 spades. My opponent has around 250 left, so pretty much a pot-sized bet. And I think you could go either way here with setting this hand up as a 2-street hand or just ripping it in here on the flop. I decided to go all in, being that my opponent had recently got felted and was clearly not in a folding mood. I think it's totally fine. He thinks about it for not too long and lays it down. So I think he just didn't really have much of anything, but I like the shove there on the flop, especially being out of position. We scoop the first pot and move on to the next hand.
3 times. What? I like bump pots. Got 10-4? You got 10-4? Oh no.
In the second hand, we look down at 9-7 of hearts from the big blind. There's an early position open at $20. 3 people make the call. Easy call for us in the big blind. We're going 5 ways to a flop, which comes Jack 9-3 with 1 heart. I check, the original opener checks, and everyone else checks behind him. When the turn comes an offsuit deuce, I think oftentimes I actually have the best hand here, and it's a good spot to bet because I don't think anyone behind the original raiser would be checking a jack multi-way here. So I lead out for $60, not so much for value, mostly for equity denial and just protection because my hand is very vulnerable. I don't want to give a free river. And everyone makes the fold. So we get the second one through and pick up a nice little pot there. This next hand, we take a little bit of a higher variance route, and I hope you guys find it entertaining to say the least. Andrew Neeme himself is in the straddle. There's 5 limps, and I'm in the small blind with queen 6 offsuit. Most of the time, obviously a fold, but with Andrew Neeme being in the straddle and getting an incredible price, I decided to make the call and see what happens. The big blind completes as well, and Andrew checks. So we're going like 60 ways to the flop here, which comes king queen 3 with 2 hearts. I started off with a check, everyone else checks around. So might have the best hand here, doubt it, but it's definitely possible. The turn brings another low card, also a heart. I think it was the 4 of hearts. I check, and it checks around to the button, who puts in a bet here. He makes it really small. He makes it $20. And I think a lot of the times he could be betting really marginal hands here just to try to steal the pot. And with that small sizing, I think I want to attack that and see what happens. I don't think he could be too strong here, especially being that he checked back the flop. So when it gets back to me, I decide to take the higher variance line and put in a check raise. I make it $100 to go. Everyone folds, it gets back to the button, and he folds pretty quick. So that one works out, and we move on to the next hand. This next hand is fairly interesting as well. It folds around to the button, who is a very capable young pro. I'd say he's probably the best player at the table. He opens to $15. The small blind folds, and we look down at 6-5 offsuit in the big blind. I could go with any 3 of the options here actually, because seeing that he opened the button after it folded around to him, he could be extremely wide. And I think a 3-bet is going to work a lot of the time. And even if he calls, we have a hand that plays decently well post flop. A fold is obviously fine, as we have 6 high and there's just no need to get creative even if he is opening wide. And a flat is also probably the least variance line, which is fine with a hand as playable as 6-5. So I decided to go with the last of those options. I make the flat call and we go heads up to a flop, which comes ace 5-3 with 2 diamonds. I check it over to him and he continues for $15, which I expect him to do with pretty much 100% of his range. We flop middle pair and it's pretty hard to flop a pair, so I make the call and we go heads up to a turn, which is a pretty decent card. It's another ace. So on this turn card, I expect him to check back a high frequency of the time. I check it over to him and to my surprise, he continues for $45, which really caught me off guard. I expected him to pot control here a lot on the turn, even if he did have a value hand aside from obviously an ace. So I put in the call, not sure what's going on here, but still not really convinced that the button has anything here, especially with a player as capable as he is. The river's an offsuit 9, so the diamonds miss and it doesn't really change the strength of our hand. Check it over to him and he puts in a pretty polarized bet here. He makes it 160, which is not obviously what I wanted to hear. I expected the river to go check a lot and I would win, but I go in the tank here. Obviously on the surface it's an easy fold, right? We have 3rd pair and we're facing a triple barrel, so we don't really beat much here. But things that I'm taking into consideration is that this is a very capable player. He could be using the 2 aces on the board as a range advantage a lot of the time, and he's just going to have a ton of busted broadways here, like king queen, king jack, king 10, queen jack, queen 10. There's a lot of hands that he could have here that we're still ahead of. So on the flip side of that, we don't have a very strong hand. We could have much better hands to call with, and for his sizing, we can fold a lot more hands than if he had bet around half pot or even a 3rd pot. So I'm not in love with my play here, but I decided to look him up and put in the call. Unfortunately, this time he does have it. He shows his ace king, so that turn card was actually terrible. It just makes it so much harder to believe that the button could have anything there. But I think it's still a fold regardless. It's just I get too caught up in like button versus blind dynamics a lot of the times, and yeah, I think we should just be giving up there on that river, but had to go for the hero call and it doesn't work out this time. On to the next hand. In this next hand, the under the gun player opens to $20. There's 2 callers in between and we look down at pocket 9s on the button. I put in the call and it folds to the big blind, who has been fairly aggressive, very active player and has a mountain of chips. He 3-bets to $100. The under the gun player calls, the 2 callers get out of the way and the action's back on us. So I think it's fine to go with a call or a fold here, but this time I call. 3 ways to a flop, which comes jack 8-7 with 2 spades. That's wrong, jack 8-6 with 2 spades. The big blind open rips it. Under the gun player thinks about it for a while and folds. And when the action gets back to us, I think it's not a super easy decision, because my instinct is that we're actually ahead here and he has like ace-x of spades, but at the same time, he seems like a thinking player and he could be using his image here to get paid off if he actually does have a big hand. After deliberation for about 2 minutes, I decided to let it go. And he later told us that he had aces with the ace of spades. It seemed fairly honest to me. It wasn't until like the end of the day that he shared that with me. So kudos to him for letting us know. And yeah, we get away this time. So the session never really caught too much traction. When you're playing a game as big as 5-5-10, because there were so many straddles and the occasional bomb pot, it adds up pretty quick. We started to get somewhat short stacked after a little bit. There was also a few hands where, well, I'll just give you an example. Early position opened to 20. We 3-bet the small blind with ace queen off suit. Early position made the call. Flop was 9, 8, 7, 2 hearts, 1 spade. We have none of the suit, and it's just not a board I'm looking to continue on, so just have to check and give up. One orbit later, a similar situation happened. We had ace jack suited in the small blind. Middle position player opened, one call in between. I make a 3-bet, and one of the players makes the call. I think it came 5, 6, 8 with 2 hearts and 1 club. Just have to put in a c-bet and give up on the turn. You guys know how it is when it just feels like you can't make a hand. Early position opens to $20. We call in middle position with red pocket 6s. The hijack, cutoff, and big blind make the call. So 5 ways to a flop here, which came 8, 5, 4 with 2 hearts. It actually checks around to me, and I think it's totally fine to rip it in here. I think I have like 150 left in my stack at this point. So I go all in, and miraculously everyone folds. That one helped out a little bit in getting back to even. So after battling for a little bit, we got back to 500. We're even on the session, and this hand develops. So the straddle's on in this hand. Early position opens to $30. Middle position makes the call, and we look down at pocket 4s on the button. Easy call. The big blind calls as well, and the straddler makes the call. So we're going 5 ways to a flop, which comes pretty nice. It's queen 4 deuce. Checks all the way to me, so I'll be putting in a bet here. I make it $75 to go. Only the big blind makes the call, and everyone else gets out of the way. The turn is not my favorite card. It's an ace of hearts, which brings the second heart on board, as well as it completes, I think, the most obvious straight draw of 5-3. So when my opponent leads for 185, it's a bit of a strange spot. I have around 400 or 350 left in my stack, and it's a question of whether I want to call and keep in all his semi-bluffs or just stick it all in there. After thinking about it for some time, I think if he's leading with any draws, he should still be calling, given the price he's going to get if I jam. And if he has complete air, so be it. But it seems like a really strange spot for him to be bluffing with absolutely no equity. I decided to go for it. I shove all in for $400, and to my surprise, he actually folds, even though he's getting a great price with a lot of holdings I expect him to be doing this with. Anyway, still collect a decent sized pot. Things are looking a bit better now, and we move on to the next hand with a healthier stack.
Okay. $50 bid. Gotta hurry up with the sunshine.
In the next hand, the under the gun player opens to $25. And this player had been fairly aggressive. He'd gotten felted, I think, like 2 or 3 times already. When we look down at pocket aces in middle position, the first thing I do is look at his stack, and he only has around 200 or 220. So I want to put in a 3-bet here, but I want to make it not too big so that he thinks he could still have some fold equity if he decides to rip it in. I make it $70, folds back to under the gun, and sure enough, our plan works. He just rips it in there right away. We make the easy call and immediately show my hand. He says no good right away. The board runs out, queen 9, 8, low cards, and he just snap rolls over queen 9. Kind of a little suck out there, but it's all in good spirits. This guy had been a lot of fun, and it's hard to be mad when someone sees pocket aces and right away says no good with that sort of confidence. I feel like if anyone should crack aces, it's that guy. So kudos to you, man.
Yeah. Get a picture. It's running bad. It's running bad, man.
However, an orbit later, it looks like we might have found some redemption when we look down at 2 kings under the gun. I wanted to induce a 3-bet here, so not sure if it's completely necessary, but I make it 15 to go. Folds to the button, who was a fairly good player. He puts in a 3-bet, makes it $45 to go. Folds back to me, so for sure looking to put in a 4-bet here. I make it 120. No need to go too big here. I'm fine with playing this hand out of position post-flop. No need for that though. When he just jams all in, I think the count was 380 total. I make the call, show my hand, and he shows his queens. Luckily enough, we hold and get back in the black for the session, though not by a ton. Nice to get this little double up and move on to the next hand. I just realized I forgot one of the hands from the session, which is actually the title of this episode. We looked down at pocket aces in one of my first ever bomb pots. Everyone puts in $20 and then we go straight to the flop where everyone has whatever 2 cards they were dealt. So 180 in the middle. We look down at pocket aces and the flop comes 999. So fairly good flop when having an overpair in a bomb pot. So when it checks to me, I think I was in middle position. I let out for half pot. I think it's fine to even size up a little bigger here, seeing that there's no draws. Players are either going to have a full house or they're not going to have pretty much anything. So I actually wouldn't mind sizing up here even more, but as played, I let out for 90 and everyone made the fold. So we took down the first bomb pot of the session, and yeah, moving on with a fairly bigger stack. Okay, so it's finally time to discuss the last notable hand from the session. And in my opinion, I think it's the most interesting and perhaps the most controversial, although I'm fairly happy with how the hand went down. There's an under the gun limp. The cutoff makes it $25, and we look down at ace queen offsuit on the button. I think the cutoff could be isolating the limper fairly wide, so I want to put in a 3-bet here. I make it $100 to go. Then the lady on my left calls 25 from the small blind. I let her know it's $100 as I have a $100 chip out in front of me, and she says, no, the rules are you have to verbally say raise. Otherwise, even if you toss in a $100 chip, that's just a call. I clarify. I let her know I have a lot of $5 chips, and if I'd wanted to call, I would have just put in the $25 in $5 chips. She says, doesn't matter. A call is a call, even if you called with a $1,000 chip. At this point, the dealer steps in and says, yeah, man, it's a call. It's not a raise. And I let her know, well, I meant to raise, so is that okay? She's like, no. Okay. So now the whole table is aware of the fact that I wanted to raise with this little debacle going on. In the casino where I normally play, that's not a rule, unless of course you don't have the other increment of chip to use. But given that I had a good amount of all types of chips, I think it's pretty clear that it should be a raise, but my bad, you know, live and learn. So it's a call. And now the under the gun player who originally limped also makes the call. So we're going 4 ways to a flop here. The flop comes 8-5-5. The small blind checks, the under the gun player checks, and the cutoff checks. The action's on us, and I think I want to keep telling the story that I have a big overpair here. So I put in a C-bet of $80. The woman in the small blind folds. Under the gun player makes the call fairly quickly, and the cutoff folds. So we're heads up to a turn, which is another 8. So now the board reads 8-5-5-8. He checks it over to us, and I wanted to just stop for a second and give my 2 cents on kind of what my thought process is in this spot. So under the gun had around $300 left, essentially a pot-sized bet left. And I think a vast majority of his calling range on the flop is going to be an 8. So given that the turn brings another 8, I should be checking back a lot here, even if I did have aces, kings, queens, etc. So I think it's fine to check back here and evaluate the river, just as if I did have a big overpair. So that's what I decide to do. And when the river comes a king and he checks it for a 3rd time, my read is that he has some kind of middling pair like 6s, 7s, 9s, possibly even 10s that play somewhat passively. And I think it's actually just a really good spot to go for it, because some percentage of the time we would play ace king this way. And if he does happen to have one of those hands that I put him on, I don't think he could stand max pressure in this spot. It's just going to be so hard for him to call with all those middling pocket pairs. Given that he's checked a 3rd time and we have ace high on a board that should hit our range fairly well, enough explanation, we rip it in, and I'm actually fairly confident that it's gonna work. Unfortunately, we get snap called and he shows us 8-9 offsuit. So he checked the turn, we check back, and then he checks the river again like a total boss. Yeah, so we lose a huge pot, and that was the last major hand from the session. I did want to note in my defense that his call on the flop is questionable, to say the least. I think, given that he knows I tried to put in the 3-bet pre-flop, and also the fact that the board is paired means his 9 is no good, because even if you were to turn a river or 9, he's still losing to all over pairs. I guess we were getting no credit whatsoever. It all kind of goes back to pre-flop. You know, if I put in that 3-bet to $100, I don't see 8-9 offsuit getting in there out of position. So that mistake cost quite a few $100s, and unfortunately we couldn't really get anything going after that.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
So we're into the game for 500 bucks, played for 6 hours, and end up cashing out for $92 for a nice little loss of $408. So yeah, could have for sure gone better. Regardless, these meetup games are mostly about having fun, getting to meet people. Obviously, we're all trying to win, but it takes somewhat of a backseat when it's such a fun environment and there's so many people to talk to and meet, etc. So very happy with the session. I had a great time, met a lot of cool people. Hope you guys enjoy this vlog. A bit of a tough L to swallow. I really wanted to book a win during my first meetup game ever, but couldn't make it happen. So anyway, thank you guys for the support. I'll see you guys next time. And I just wanted to give a quick PSA that San Manuel Casino, which is one of the main poker rooms I play in, is unfortunately closing at the end of April. So I'll be spending a lot of time there. For those of you who are local, I suggest you try to make at least one last visit before it's closed forever. Thanks again to you guys for watching, for commenting. For those of you who liked the video, I really appreciate that. And hopefully you guys enjoy these videos. I'll catch you guys next time. Good luck until then. Peace.